Welcome and hello. This is a video lesson in RIMS, and in this lesson, we're going to be talking about viewing DSS results. All right, so I've got my RIMS up right here on the screen. I've already ran a simulation, and then I've modified the inflow data to change the results of that simulation. So I'm actually going to be comparing two different model results. This model is based on my exercise 8 project, which uses this model schematic. So we're going to be looking at the inflow I-RES1 as well as one of the other flows right here I'll talk about later. All right, I'll leave a link to this exercise aid if you're curious about it, but for this video, this lesson, we're going to be talking about viewing the results using some of the DSS tools. So here at the top, if you click on IDE, that's typically where I'm viewing my file data, but then there's also a button here for DSS. So we're going to stay on DSS for this lesson. And then down below here, we have a number of tabs. The first one I usually keep to the far left is the console window, but then we also have DSS files, DSS catalog view, and then DSS options. So we're going to explore the files, catalog view, and options as we check out DSS plots and tables. Like I said, I already have results saved in my dv.dss file. So let's go ahead and get started with that. I'm going to click on this first tab here. And you can't see the name of the tab unless I expand this window really far over. So DSS files, DSS catalog, DSS options. But I'm going to keep it a little bit more compact for now. All right, so with the DSS files tab selected on the bottom, I need to select the decision variable file and the state variable file for each of the alternatives that I want to compare. So I'm going to go ahead and compare those two results. So I'll check on the checkbox for alternative 1 and alternative 2. And now if I click on the DV button, this is where I need to navigate to and select the decision variable file for alternative 1. Another way to do it is to just drag the file directly from the window. So I have my original DV, init, and SV files, and then I have original. This is where I'm writing original results and then the modified results. I'll show you what the difference is in that inflow. So DV original, I'm going to put in my alt1. Alt1 is going to be original, and then DV modified. Okay, so those are the decision variables. The DSS file containing the decision variable paths. And then over here, the second column here is state variables. So I'm going to go SV original for alternative 1 and then SV modified for alternative 2. Over here to the far right, there is a drop down for either Cal Light, CalSim 3, or CalSim 2. And this is a lesson on RIMS. I'm not talking about CalSim per se. However, if you're running CalSim, you're going to want to select the exact CalSim model that you're running. There's also a number of other tabs here, which I'm not going to talk about, like San Joaquin, what is this, storage, Los Vaqueros enlargement. Yeah, so some of RIMS is actually built specifically for CalSim analysis. And what we're going to be talking about here is just the generic DSS data that can be applied to pretty much any project. So we can just go ahead and ignore that. And then what we want to do is click open. There's also buttons for open project and save project. Now the text kind of gets cut off, but it just says open project and save project here. In fact, if I wanted to save project, then it would actually save a reference to these paths. So it's easier for me to load the project later and not have to take a long time searching for all these files. So to do that, I just click on save project. I'll go ahead and name it comparison1 .dsv and save it to my desktop. So I'll click save. And then what that looks like is, see, open that up. Here's that DSV file that we just saved. Variable values are separated by white space. Value obviously cannot contain white space. So what basically it is for alternative 1 DV, it's giving me the file path. Alternative 2 DV, there's that file path. So original and modified. And then I don't have any alternative 3 or 4. And then below that, it's the state variable for alternative 1 and alternative 2. Right down here is probably the CalSim, CalLight reference. And this is an absolute path. So if you're going to send this to another user, they'd have to update these paths if it's on a different computer with a different path. All right, I'll go ahead and close that. All right, so let's go ahead and click open now. And what it did is it searched for the paths in that decision variable file and the inflow in the state variable file. I'm going to make my columns a little bit narrower here. So I have my parts A through F here just to identify which path I'm looking at. And if I click on I-RES1, what it does is it brings up the DSS table up above here. Oh, by the way, also, when I was in this tab right here and clicked OK, this is the DSS files tab. When I clicked OK, it automatically moved me over to the DSS catalog view. So just so you know that that switch happened. Up above, I'm seeing the DSS table data, and then right here is the data for my first alternative. Here's the data for my second alternative. And then at the top of this column, it it's the exact same label, but this is part B, part C, and part F of the file path. So in the future, I probably should have named part F a little bit different because they both refer to the inflow to reservoir and the flow rate is the parameter, but part F should probably be like base case and then like modified version. The difference between the inflow that I made for this model was down in water year 1925. Yeah, so starting right here, I actually subtracted 5 CFS. So we're going to have 5 CFS less in 1925, 10 CFS less starting right here in 1926. This is water year 1926, and then 1927 back to just 5 CFS less. And then later in 1930 through 1934, my second alternative is 5 CFS more, 10, 15, 10, and then 5 CFS more than the original. So we're going to go ahead and see that in a plot. In fact, let's go ahead and look at the plot right here. I clicked on plot. And now, well, it's kind of hard to see because I have 100 years worth of data. But in the first, say, 10 or 20 years here, you can see there's a little bit of deviation between the blue and red. Blue representing the original, Alt 1, and then red representing the modified, which is Alt 2. The last tab over, which is on the far left, is the DSS monthly tab. Now let me go ahead and make some room here. What we're seeing at the top is the inflow data, because I have inflow selected, and that is for alternative 1. It starts at water year 1922, and then if I scroll down here to the end of that 100-year simulation, here's the bottom of that first alternative data for inflow, and then below that, I'm starting the inflow data for the second alternative, which is the modified values. Okay, and then if I scroll all the way to the bottom of that, I'm seeing some totals. So we have average, min, max. The columns represent the month, the rows represent the year, and then as you'll notice, some of the values are red and blue. Blue means it's the highest value for that row or that year. And then red represents the lowest value, just to kind of stand out a little bit there. And now would be a good time to talk about the DSS options. So this tab next to DSS catalog view is DSS options. And originally I couldn't find my DSS options tab. I think I had closed it, but I was able to recover it by searching on the filter. Oh, right up here for quick access. I think I typed in DSS options and then boom, I just, clicked on DSS options. That window popped up and I was able to find it and then reposition it down here. But if you're used to Eclipse, you can actually undock and dock these different windows. And okay, it takes some getting used to. And I don't like what I just did there. So let me put that back. Okay, there we go. So I have the DSS options tab sort of in its own separate window. And then I have my DSS files and DSS catalog right here. So within the DSS options, I have a few things to talk about. What we've been looking at so far is the comparison view, and then difference view is right here. Hold on. It appears to be cut off a little bit. I just have to make this wider, I guess. So anyway, this is the comparison view that we've been looking at. Okay, there we go. But if I wanted to look at, say, the difference, I can click on this difference radio button, and now we can actually see the difference. So for water year 1925, which starts in October, that has a difference of -5, and then -10, and then -5 for water years 1925, 26, and 27. But if I scroll down a little bit, we see the opposite is true, where we have 5, 10, 15, 10, and then 5 increased CFS each month. And then over to the right are the totals. We can also just look at 1 month at a time. So next to this filter button, we have all the months highlighted. But if I just click on October, then I'm only seeing October data, only November data, December data. If I hold down Shift, I can actually get multiple months, just the months I want to select. If I want to go back to all the months, then I just select October through September, and boom, there are all the months again. Now, I've been looking at this data with water year in mind, meaning we're starting in October, but there's also an option right here. So here's the radio button for annual type. October through September looks like it's the first option, the default option. But if I select on January to December, that's like the calendar year. So if I click that, then boom, now the first column is January, then February, then March. So you might want to be looking at your data that way. And then over here, it doesn't say water year, it just says year. There's also an option here for organizing your months by saying the year starts in March and goes to February. So, yeah, I'm not sure who's using that, but I'm probably going to stick with water year or calendar year. There's also a time window right here. So if you wanted to specify a certain range of dates, you can do that. Some of these are preset for specific wet or dry seasons, but at the bottom here, I can click add. So yeah, let's go ahead and give this a try. Let's go October 1921 until September 1941. So that's the first 20 years of the simulation. Then I'll click OK. Now, if I go back to my plot, that may be a little bit easier. Oh, okay. Yeah. So we have difference selected. That's a good thing to point out. It looks like it did not update my date range, even though this is selected. But anyway, we have, yeah, a decrease of 5 and 10 CFS, and then another increase up to 15 CFS. Okay, there we go. I click difference and then comparison. There we go. Yeah, so the 20-year time horizon has now updated. That's good. Here's the comparison zoomed in so we can see the difference a little bit easier. And then here is the difference, just one inflow subtracted from the other. All right, on the far right, we have units, which is kind of cut off, but for flow rate, CFS. And then if you happen to be like tracking reservoir storage, for instance, you'd probably click on TAF for 1,000 acre feet. Definitely a unit US a bias built into some of the software with apparently no metric unit option. But that's all right. You could just go to DSS view and basically get all these results. A few more things to point out with regard to the plot. We've been looking at model data, this radio button down here, but you can also click on exceedance probability and then annual total. Actually, hold on. Let me switch over to comparison. Oh, there we go. I had to click on comparison. All right, so where were we? Here's the model data. Here's the exceedance probability. That looks better. So we can see both the inflow. Red is modified. That's why it has higher peaks. And then also at the very end, it's a little bit lower. And then annual total plot is right here. And then here's an annual exceedance plot. So that was the inflow. I want to select a different type of data. Here in my model schematic, I have farm 3, which receives water from this diversion from node 3, which I have labeled as C3F3. So let's go ahead and look at that data. Well, here's C34. Here's C3F3, which is the flow to farm 3. Now I could just click on this, or if I go to my filter, I could type in C3 and then F3, and then click on filter, and then boom, here's that path. But if I wanted to get, for instance, all of the paths that start with C3, I could just say C underscore 3 underscore and then an asterisk, and then click on filter. And then what it returns for me is, like I said, all of the paths in that DSS file that match this particular pattern for part B. In addition to the asterisk, there's also a pipe operator. So if I wanted to look at C3, F3, and C4, F4, this pipe operator should serve as an OR. So if I click on filter, oops, I typed that wrong. I need to have a 3 right here. Let's see if that works. And filter, boom. So I have exactly those two paths. And if I wanted everything that starts with C3 and C4, I'll just replace the F term at the end in both and then click on the filter. All right, so now we have everything that starts with either C underscore 3 underscore or C underscore 4 underscore, which is right here. So it's just a different way to look at the data. Also, you can select multiple paths. So I'm selecting multiple paths right here just by holding down the control key. But you might find yourself looking at too much data if you start looking at tables and hundreds of years of data for multiple paths. So anyway, that's just another way to select the data that you're looking at. And that is all I had prepared for this lesson, where we talked about viewing the DSS data in WRIMS.